Hi everyone, I'm Moose, and today on Nerd, we're looking at the legacy of TV's most legendary science fiction series.
You've just crossed over into the Twilight Zone.
Why did Rod Serling create the show in the first place? How do its various reboots throughout the years stack up to the original? And what does the Twilight Zone mean in 2019? This is the true story of the Twilight Zone. Now, time can get a little funky inside the fifth dimension, so let's keep things simple and start at the beginning with the origin. Creator Rod Serling's career began in the waning days of radio, where he was able to witness firsthand the medium's slow decline into irrelevance.
Well, if that don't beat the...
Serling was disheartened by the lack of quality and ambition he experienced in the world of radio drama, and he was determined not to let the same thing happen with a newfangled invention called television. After making the leap to the moving image, Serling's innovative, insightful scripts began turning heads, although he chafed against censorship and sponsor demands. In one script, he was forced to delete the line, "I need a match," because the show was being paid for by a lighter company. In another, he had to remove shots of the Chrysler building from the New York skyline because that show was sponsored by Ford.
Get the full story at your Ford dealers.
Worse than petty pedantic problems, Serling's sponsors refused to let him address anything controversial. He wanted to tackle important social issues about race and class and what it means to be human. But he quickly realized that the only way to do that would be to create his own show.
So long as you're appealing to in a sense, a totally commercial entity whose job it is to move product, then wherein lies a challenge to networks to improve the quality of their product?
So he did. His first script for what he hoped would become the Twilight Zone was called The Time Element, about a man convinced he's traveling back to the day of the Pearl Harbor attack. All of the classic Serling hallmarks are present, from the trippy premise to the twist ending. And while CBS dug the script, they didn't want to commit to a series. So they filmed it for a show produced by Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz instead. Now, Ricky Ricardo's narration doesn't quite evoke the gravitas of Serling's stern monologues, but the episode was a hit, and CBS quickly gave the green light to the Twilight Zone. The Twilight Zone was groundbreaking in more ways than we can count. It wasn't the first dedicated science fiction show on TV. Kids shows like Captain Video and earlier anthologies like Tales of Tomorrow beat it to the screen by a few years. But Serling elevated the genre to the same heights it was achieving on the printed page. He used scripts and stories from legends like Richard Matheson and Ray Bradbury, paving the way for future cerebral shows like The Outer Limits and, of course, Star Trek. Which was also a Desilu production. With the Twilight Zone, Serling finally had the chance to produce his powerful political scripts, like The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, an allegory for Cold War McCarthyist paranoia.
Well, they're our neighbors. We've known the Goodmans ever since they came here. We've been good friends.
That don't prove a thing.
Or I Am the Night, Color Me Black, where all the racism in the world comes to life and forms a cloud of smothering darkness.
Look what's happened. It's getting even darker now.
Look, no one ever said the Twilight Zone was subtle. But in telling socially conscious stories in the early 60s, it was definitely radical. Still, as innovative as it was, The Twilight Zone was never much of a ratings hit. The show was actually canceled and revived twice during its 5-year run, and by the time the axe dropped a third time, Serling was just too exhausted to fight it. He owned nearly every aspect of production. He wrote 92 of the 156 episodes and hosted every single one despite his crippling stage fright.
So, gentlemen, please sit back and take your first trip into the Twilight Zone.
The Twilight Zone. The Twilight Zone. The Twilight Zone. The Twilight Zone.
Serling moved on to less taxing roles, like appearing in commercials, hosting game shows, and writing the screenplay for Planet of the Apes.
God damn you all to hell!
After The Twilight Zone was canceled, ABC offered to pick it up with some conditions. They wanted to focus strictly on schlocky horror and change the title to Witches, Warlocks, and Werewolves. Rather than see his baby bastardized, Serling sold his stake in The Twilight Zone to CBS. Things were different in the 60s. Reruns and syndication were still in their infancy, and once a show ended, it just kind of languished forgotten in a vault. Serling didn't see any further value in his creation, and for a while, neither did CBS. He eventually returned to the world of anthologies with Rod Serling's Night Gallery, and while he could definitely rock a mean set of 70s sideburns, without creative control, the horror series never reached the same heights as The Twilight Zone, and neither did its many reboots. Through the years, creatives like Francis Ford Coppola and Serling himself pitched the network on potential revivals, but CBS didn't bite. Instead, they opted to make a big-budget anthology movie in 1983, with each segment helmed by the biggest directors of the day, like John Landis, Mad Max's George Miller, Gremlins' Joe Dante, and Steven Spielberg, who oversaw the whole production. 3 stories were remakes that upped the budget and intensity of their original episodes, but lacked the sincerity and gravitas that Serling brought to the table.
What are you doing?
And the only original segment, called Time Out, is forever overshadowed by the tragic helicopter accident that killed Vic Miller and 2 child actors who were working illegally on the set. Reviews were mixed, and while it didn't exactly set the box office on fire, it garnered enough interest that CBS gave the green light for a new series in 1985. They were never big believers in the show, but in a post-E.T. and Poltergeist world, they saw an audience for serious and spooky science fiction.
They're here.
Now, the new series had some real talent behind the scenes, like director Wes Craven, and scripts from sci-fi powerhouses like Harlan Ellison and George R.R. Martin. There was no shortage of star power in front of the camera either, but still, the show never found an audience. Maybe it was the fact that there was no on-screen Serling-style narrator, or that new theme song by the Grateful Dead was just too far out, man. Either way, the 80s Twilight Zone was a ratings disappointment, and it was canned after 3 seasons. Which is a bummer because there were a lot of quality episodes in there, but at least it lasted longer than the 2002 reboot on UPN. The new series righted at least one wrong of the 80s version by tapping Forrest Whitaker to fill Serling's role as the on-camera narrator. But the opening theme by Jonathan Davis from Korn has not aged nearly as well.
You're traveling to another dimension. A dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind.
The series was yet another mix of new stories and classic episodes updated for a post-9/11 world, like a new version of Maple Street that substituted terrorism for the aliens of the original.
Their house could be a beacon to show the terrorists where to bomb.
Or a straight-up sequel to the iconic It's a Good Life, where the all-powerful Anthony has an even more omnipotent daughter.
We don't want to make him angry, do we?
I don't care. I hate him.
Sadly, it only lasted a single season, and the Twilight Zone returned to the realm of reruns and annual marathons. At least until CBS announced an all-new incarnation for 2019. And if you ask me, it is the perfect time, because the last 60 years of science fiction has been shaped by Rod Serling's influence. Rod Serling, a lifelong smoker, died of a heart attack on June 28, 1975. He was already an icon among the sci-fi set.
Yes, I'm the mayor of this town. As a matter of fact, they named it after me. I'm Mr. Zone.
But he passed long before his true impact could be felt on pop culture. The Twilight Zone was never a commercial juggernaut, but it lived on through novels, games, one of the greatest pinball machines of all time, and a theme park ride that was so terrifying they made a whole damn movie about it. It's not just about the merch either. Hundreds of shows throughout history have paid tribute to the Twilight Zone.
You're Hitler! No! Ava Braun, help me! Saw it coming.
From SNL to Goth Merengue's Dark Place. It might be the most parodied pop culture relic next to Citizen Kane. Hell, we did a whole video on how The Simpsons paid homage to Serling's show, and that's just scratching the surface. But beyond references, The Twilight Zone is almost single-handedly responsible for bringing intelligent, high-quality science fiction with a message to the masses. Sci-fi had always tackled social issues through allegory and fantasy, just look at H.G. Wells or Jules Verne. But Serling took it out of the bookstores, matinee cinemas, and pulp magazines and blew the minds of millions of people around the world. The Twilight Zone proved that TV shows could be smart, socially aware, and yes, scary, without dumbing things down or playing to the lowest common denominator. Its influence can be seen in everything from the cerebral horror and terrifying twists of David Lynch and M. Night Shyamalan to the razor-sharp techno-savvy satire of Black Mirror, which, come on, is Twilight Zone but smartphones. Anthology series are back in a big way, and given the current state of global politics, the world has never been more ready for a new spin on Serling's staple. And when we found out that noted comedian, actor, writer, director, and How to Kill fan Jordan Peele was going to produce and host, we were all in. So, how will the new Twilight Zone live up to Serling's legacy? Only time will tell, but luckily, we've got all the time in the world. Thanks for watching, everybody. What is your favorite episode of The Twilight Zone across all the incarnations? You like Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, Talkie Tina, The Killer Doll, Little Girl Lost, It's a Good Life, Sending People Out to the Cornfield, and God knows what else? Leave a comment, let me know, and as always, please subscribe to Now This Nerd.